I was only 16 when my world collapsed. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, my parents looked me in the eye and told me I was no longer their daughter. They didn't shout. They didn't cry. They just cut me off as if I were a stranger. Why? Because I was pregnant. My father's words still burn inside me. You made your choice. From today, you are not part of this family. And just like that, the people who were supposed to protect me abandoned me. I remember standing outside the house with a small bag of clothes, shaking in the cold. My mother didn't even look out the window. The same woman who once tucked me into bed every night closed the curtains and let me go. That night, I promised myself one thing. I would raise my child with or without them. But I never thought that 20 years later those same parents, who abandoned me, who left me to suffer alone, would come back, demanding rights to the very child they threw me away for. Yes, 20 years later they returned. Not with regret. Not with apology. But with lawyers. With demands. With arrogance. And this is how I gave them the answer they deserved. Life after that night was brutal. I had no money. No family. No home. Just a body too young to carry a baby, and a heart broken beyond repair. I slept on my friend's couch for weeks, hiding my swollen stomach under baggy clothes. At school, whispers followed me in the hallway. Teachers looked at me with pity, classmates with judgment. But the hardest part was hearing my parents were living normally, attending parties, smiling in church as though I didn't exist. When my son was born, I named him Arjun. The moment I held him, I swore he would never feel the abandonment I had felt. I worked any job I could, washing dishes, cleaning houses, stacking shelves in a store at night. My hands cracked, my back ached, but every coin went to baby milk, diapers, and rent for a tiny room we shared. There were nights I cried into a pillow so he wouldn't hear me. Nights I went to bed hungry so he could eat. But slowly life changed. Arjun grew strong. He smiled at me with eyes full of trust. And that trust gave me strength. Years passed. I studied at night, earned a degree, and got a steady job. I became both mother and father, both shield and sword. By the time Arjun was in college, we had built a life that no betrayal could break. Or so I thought. Until the past came knocking on my door. It started with a letter. A plain white envelope in my mailbox. Inside, a formal notice with words that nearly made me collapse. My parents, after 20 years of silence, were suing for grandparent rights. They wanted legal visitation. They claimed they had the right to be part of my son's life. The same people who had turned their backs when I begged for mercy. The same people who let me walk away in tears. Now they wanted to walk back into my son's world, as if nothing had happened. First I laughed bitterly. This must be a joke, I told myself. But it wasn't. They had hired lawyers. They had money, influence, and arrogance on their side. And me? I had nothing but memories of pain and 20 years of silence. Arjun, now a young man, looked at me with confusion. Mom, I don't even know them. Why are they doing this? I had no answer. But deep inside, anger boiled. Not just for myself, but for my son. Because they weren't doing this out of love. They were doing it out of pride. Out of ego. Out of a need to control what they had once rejected. And that's when I knew. I had to fight. Not with fists. Not with screams. But with truth. My parents sat there dressed in expensive clothes. Heads held high, pretending to be victims. My mother dabbed fake tears, whispering to her lawyer. My father kept glaring at me, as though I was still that helpless teenager he once threw out. Their lawyer painted them as grieving grandparents, who deserved a chance to bond with their grandson. I almost laughed out loud. Bond? Where were they when I was begging for help? Where were they when I was sleeping hungry? When it was my turn to speak, I stood up with shaking hands but a steady voice. I told the judge everything. How they abandoned me at 16. How they let me suffer alone, carrying a child they refused to even acknowledge. How they cut me off completely, never visiting, never writing, never asking if I was alive or dead. I showed proof. Old letters I wrote them that were returned unopened. Medical bills I paid alone. Photographs of my son growing up without a single trace of them in his life. And then Arjun himself spoke. He looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, I don't know these people. My mother raised me alone. She is my family. She is my everything. Why should strangers suddenly have rights over my life?" The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge looked shaken. And for the first time in 20 years, I saw my parents' faces crack. Not with guilt but with shock. Because their perfect image was shattered. The case dragged on for weeks. My parents used every trick, spreading lies about me, saying I kept Arjun away, that I poisoned him against them. But truth has a way of shining through lies. I gathered witnesses, neighbors who saw me struggling alone, teachers who knew I worked night shifts to pay school fees, friends who remembered how my parents pretended I didn't exist. Piece by piece, I built a wall of truth so strong, no lie could break it. And then, during the final hearing, I played my last card. A recording. It was from that night 20 years ago when my father threw me out. My friend had secretly recorded it on a small tape recorder. His voice filled the courtroom. You made your choice. From today, you are not part of this family. Gasps echoed across the room. My mother buried her face in her hands. My father turned red with rage. The judge's eyes hardened. And in that moment their entire facade collapsed. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was simple, showing the world the truth they tried to bury. And the truth destroyed them. The judge's ruling came swift and sharp. Petition denied. The grandparents abandoned both mother and child. They have no legal or moral standing in this case. Those words felt like the chains of 20 years snapping off my shoulders. My parents stood frozen, disbelief etched on their faces. For once they had no control, no authority, no power. As we walked out of the courtroom, my father tried to speak. You can't do this to us. I turned, looked him straight in the eye, and said the words I had waited decades to say. No. You did this to yourself. And I walked away, my son by my side, leaving them to drown in the emptiness they had created. Life after the trial felt lighter. For the first time I wasn't carrying their shadow. Arjun and I celebrated. Not with parties or champagne, but with a quiet dinner, laughter, and gratitude for the bond we had built. We didn't need them. We never had. But deep down I realized something. My parents didn't lose because I fought harder. They lost because they had already abandoned us long ago. Love cannot be claimed in court. Respect cannot be demanded after years of betrayal. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, care, and presence. And in that sense, they were never truly my family. So what's the lesson here? It's simple. Betrayal may cut deep. Abandonment may leave scars. But in the end, truth and resilience can turn wounds into weapons. My parents thought their status and money would win them rights. But they forgot the one thing stronger than both: love. The love of a mother who never gave up. The love of a son who stood by her side. That bond was unshakable, untouchable. And no court in the world could rewrite it. So if you're listening to this story and you've faced betrayal, remember this. Your past doesn't define you. The people who left you don't own your future. Stand tall. Hold on to your truth. And never forget. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply living the life they said you couldn't. Because in the end, justice isn't always given by others. Sometimes justice is simply surviving and thriving.